Hi, friends. Welcome to the Knife Show, where we dissect the human psyche and society. My name is Joyce Meg, and I'm an INFJ.
And my name is Denzel Mensa. I'm an ENFJ. And today we're going to talk about martyrdom and pretty much sacrificing yourself for the sake of others. So, Joyce, I want you to go ahead and take lead this time, especially as an INFJ. What what have you experienced with that? And then on top of that, like how have you been able to overcome it? Or how are some ways that you're still overcoming it? Maybe even also what you've observed with other people that are, dealing with that. Three-part question.
Yeah. So, martyrdom, it bleeds a lot into codependency. So, the concept of having poor boundaries, feeling the need to please others, helping others to a fault of your own. They're kind of also traits that coincide with general codependency. So if you relate, it's not just an NFJ thing. I find that there are a lot of NFJs who have it because feeling types sometimes have bad boundaries, some of them. And so my story with giving too much is I have a really hard time saying mean things to people or saying things that might hurt people's feelings.
Mhm.
And so I tend to want to say yes. I tend to want to sugarcoat things. I tend to want to make sure like people feel good. And the thing is that can really cause you to compromise your own integrity for other people.
Mhm.
I really want to respect people's feelings, and I don't want to get on people's bad side because I know the side effects of getting on people's bad side. And sometimes people they can retaliate in ways that are kind of scary. People, when you don't meet their needs, they can get aggressive. And so what can happen is when you're around people who are generally hostile or people who express discontent in you a lot, you might feel the need to overcompensate and overdrive yourself, to overwork yourself, or to kind of over appease people because you want to make sure that they're not upset, that they're not triggered, because when they're triggered, everything in the place kind of like it kind of brings the whole mood down. And
Yeah.
so having a history around volatile people and people who are kind of, you cannot predict how they will react.
Mhm.
I developed a side of myself where I always want to overextend myself to make sure that others are feeling okay, that I'm not rocking the boat with what I'm saying too much, or
Mhm.
else other people might react in a poor way, that it might cause disharmony, it might cause upset, it might cause things where I might blame myself for it. So I have a side of myself where I just blame myself for everything. Someone frowns during a social event. I wonder if I contributed to that. Someone has a negative reaction, or they're being inconsolable, like there's nothing I can do to make them feel better. I can blame myself. I can feel guilty. I'm like, what could I have done more? What could I have said that could have helped them in this state, when really I could have done nothing?
Mhm.
It's when a situation is completely on the other person, I might still feel like it's my fault that I didn't do more, that I didn't listen more, that I didn't whatever more. And so it all results in this feeling of not feeling good enough. I'll just keep trying to overextend and overextend. I always assume that I'm the one that's wrong. So what will happen is we'll have a fight or something with a friend. And it's hard for me to sometimes acknowledge that it was only the other person's fault. In some situations, like 99% of the blame is on the other person, 1% of the blame is on me. But sometimes I will take on like 99% of it, even though they're actually 99% of the cause. And
Yeah.
I'm well aware of it. And that's martyrdom. It's like you're taking on all the responsibility on yourself when it's not all of your responsibility. And so what will happen is you'll be in these situations where it's clearly the other person is contributing to it way more than you are, but you still think that you're the core issue, or that you could have done something that could have made them react less. So there's this cycle where you shame yourself for not being able to have placated the situation well enough.
Mm.
Yeah. So that's my experience of it. How about you?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that you said, which is just going to be like pretty much the theme of this conversation, is taking on more responsibility than you need to. So that whole idea of like, okay, somebody frowned in this social event. Oh my gosh, what could have I done to like help that situation or like maybe do something? Maybe this is just how I am. You said like honestly, there's probably nothing that I could have done. Maybe for me, I don't know if it's like just being fe dom or what, but in my head, I'm almost always thinking, and this could be the problem in itself. I'm always thinking to myself like, no, there is something that I probably could have done, but the biggest thing is like whether or not I could have done something, the biggest thing is, was it my responsibility to do something? And a lot of the times it's really not. And that's something that I had to really like learn to know where my responsibility lies and where it doesn't. And be okay with where it doesn't lie and where it does. Because I think that's one of the biggest things. Like people may not be able to accept a lot of times like where they end and somebody else begins kind of thing. And I feel like especially like for NFJs, granted I think it could be like a lot of different types, but especially for NFJs having like FE and NI, it's like we're natural empaths. And I know that I just saw like a TikTok today randomly, and somebody like it was like some video of like, oh, when you're an empath, then you always know when somebody's lying, and you always know when like this, and it kind of like was clearly saying this whole like, woe is me, like I'm an empath, so I'm superior to you, and because I'm superior to you, then like now I'm like uh I'm suffering more than you are due to your inferiority to me. And that's not in any way what we're saying over here. We're just literally just stating like it more as like a fact, like whether or not being an empath is cool or superior or not, which I don't believe that it's superior. The fact of the matter is like we are usually people who absorb the feelings of other people to the point where we may not be able to even decipher which feelings are ours and which feelings are somebody else's, especially when you have FE and I together. So like NFJs, this is just something that happens a lot with a lot of them. So obviously, like once you start to see this kind of like pattern happening, and you're starting to like notice that, okay, when I'm with these people, their mood influences me. It's kind of like, all right, then in that case, I have to make sure that I'm taking care. It kind of is now my responsibility, or I'm taking on that responsibility of the external, because if I can manage and mitigate everybody else's emotions, their emotional experience and stuff like that, that'll allow me to be able to have my emotional experience properly mitigated and just healthy and whatever. But when it comes to doing that, you're almost always going to kill yourself, because people are fickle, and that's just point blank period. And so once you're continuously straining yourself to meet the needs of all of the people that you're around, it's going to constantly get in the way of you being able to actually set the boundaries needed for yourself to not only overserve them, but also not to let their emotions come and impede upon you. So if anything, being an empath is definitely a gift in some places, in some points, but there's also still growth that needs to be there. And some of that growth is setting those boundaries so that you're not always taking on other people's emotions. You're able to decipher, okay, these are my emotions, and that's the other person's emotions. And then on top of that, being able to know, okay, because I'm feeling this person's emotions, it's not my responsibility just because I feel it. But now, you check in with yourself? Do I have the energy to go and try and mitigate this situation and like help them in a certain way. If you don't have the energy, if you don't have your oxygen mask on first, the FI users will tell you straight up. If you don't have your oxygen mask on first, then you probably shouldn't go try to help anyone else. In fact, the literal image that I'm getting of a martyr is somebody who, oh, I don't have my mask or anything, and I'm not even going to necessarily like try to get my mask, but I'm going to definitely try to put one on you. And it's like, although that might seem like heroic, you should definitely try to find a way to get your mask. Because then that way, if you're really trying to quote unquote be a hero, now you're going to be more effectively able to help more people. You're not just allowing yourself to be killed by this one incident to save that one life. But now you've been able to save your own, which is more capable of now being able to save many other people's. And the goal is even once again, like, not to put your focus on everybody else to like, oh, I have to save everyone. I have to save everyone. So yeah, all that to say, making it now personal. Yeah, I definitely struggled a lot with that. Where every circle that I was in, and I think especially being an Enneagram social 9 plus FE Dom, ENFJ at that, it's like I'm constantly just feeling everybody's emotions, to the point where I have to, like, a lot of times pretend. I talked about this on my video with Geek Psychology, Matt Sherman. I talked about like how, like, as an ENFJ, I play the part a lot of times. So it's like life is almost like a stage that I know everybody's script to an extent, and I know mine, and I know what's going to happen in the script. But if I skip a part, if I skip a line, things aren't going to make sense. So just because you know what's going to happen doesn't mean that you should not still say your own lines and play a part. And you shouldn't even let other people really know what their line is, or that you know what their line is, because that'll mess with the play. It's going to get meta and a whole bunch of stuff like that. So that was a really abstract thing, like an abstract way of putting it. But what I'm trying to say from that is that from being able to know like where my responsibility lies, and always like taking on everybody's emotions and feeling everyone's emotions, then I always made it my responsibility to try and mitigate and be the shepherd of everybody else's emotional experience. But that came at the sacrifice of my own, especially once again being an Enneagram 9. I wasn't always aware of my actual inner emotions. I was just always aware of everybody else's that was coming towards me. So what I had to really work on, and I'm even still working on, is knowing where to invest that energy, and also knowing where responsibility lies to go and fix the situation. And okay, this person, I can help them and I have the energy to help them. If I can't help them, it sucks, but I have to like keep to myself. Or if I don't have the energy to be able to help them, it sucks, but I have to like, keep that to myself as well. I can't be a martyr for that situation. Do I ever feel bad? Absolutely. But this is where now you have to like learn to start caring for yourself too, not in a selfish way, but as a way to like self-care so that you can continue to be there tomorrow to help more people. And it's a tough call, but it really does make like, there's a lot of meditation that has to get involved in like just really centering yourself and being able to like have that energy to then go back out and really like help people in the way that you'd like to, that's going to be the most efficient, without having to kill yourself in the process. And the biggest FE lesson is when you're out there meeting everybody else's needs, don't forget that you are a part of everybody. So yeah, that's what I have to say on that, for right now.
Those are great lessons, Denzel.
Thanks.
I think the types that are most likely to struggle with martyrdom or being a martyr are the NF types in general. And my reasoning for that is they have really big ideals for the world. So they're like, this is my ideal for humanity. If we all just did this idealistic thing, then life would be a better place for everyone. And so in order to enact their great ideal onto the world, they might sacrifice themselves. It's almost like, for the sake of the ideal, I will use myself as tributes, which is an unhealthy NF mentality, because then you really need to take care of you. Otherwise, there's no person to take care of the world.
Right.
And so it's almost like when you see this ideal version of the world so clearly, or what it could be, or its potential, it's very easy for you to neglect yourself in order to pursue caring for that ideal, because you're going to feel this sense of purpose, almost this twisted sense of purpose for sacrificing yourself to take care of other people, because you see how it fits into a bigger picture. And so you dedicate your life to this bigger picture that doesn't have you and your health and your quality of life included, because it's just one little dot in that grand scheme that you see. And so ultimately, I have a lot of NF clients coming to me talking about how they want to get over their martyrdomness, but they can't find a way to yet. And so I find it's also a general codependency thing too.
Oh, yeah. There's definitely a codependency element there.
There's definitely an element there. And it's because sometimes when it's hard to feel a sense of self-worth from just yourself, or from just self-validation, then you're going to seek others' validation too for your self-worth too. And so it's also a clue that if you are kind of over appeasing people, that you don't feel psychologically safe and just enough as you are. You feel like in order to feel psychologically safe and to not get casted off the metaphorical island, you feel like you have to appease other people so that they don't exclude you or kind of outcast you and leave you to die. And so there's also there's a big fear component too, sometimes subconsciously, to giving to other people. It's because it's that fear of being not enough and then being outcasted from the tribe and then dying. So it comes down to survival too. Some of our most basic core actions, it comes from like this caveman part of our brain, actually, because it's all comes down to, I want to survive. And at some point in my life, it signaled death, that I wasn't appeasing a person enough. So now I feel the need to constantly appease people, because I feel like it's a matter of life or death if people hate me enough. And they might just cause a situation, or being left out of the group signals to your brain the same response as dying. Because it's literally, now you can infer that you might die if you're being left out of this human collective. And so sometimes a people-pleasing urge can come from a deep-seated fear of being kicked out of the tribe. What overly people-pleasing does for me is sometimes I'll suppress my opinion or confuse myself or doubt myself in order to maintain connection with other people. So if I'm in a group and my opinion is a highly controversial opinion, it's very easy to kind of gaslight my own opinion or downplay my own opinion, or get confused by someone else's stronger opinion, because I want to make them feel good. I don't want to threaten the connection by having a weird thought, And so there's this cognitive dissonance. The TI part of you wants to maintain truth and accuracy and clean data, whereas the FE part of you wants the bond between you and another person to be as strong as possible. And so there's this, it's like, which string do I choose? It's like this tug of war in you. It's like, what they're saying doesn't seem that right, but also I don't know just the right words to say to make a convincing enough argument that people will even give the opinion I have a shot, or it might even ruin the connection we have. So is it worth it to really display this weird white noise I feel in my head, that I'm feeling a cognitive contradiction, and I can feel the contradiction. My brain is giving me that red flag signal where it does that when I hear something that sounds inaccurate. But will I listen to it, and will I call it out, and will I have an honest discussion with someone if I know that it might result in the rapport lessening, or in our bond, or in them feeling worse, or in them threatening the relationship in any way? Is it worth it? And so there's this constant exchange between FE and TI, and going like, is it worth it to show my TI? Is this the correct time to show my TI? It takes a while for you to share your opinion.
Yeah. You had so many great points over there. Like that, those are awesome. The first thing that I actually, I kind of like made a small note of was how you believe that like NFs are usually like the main types of like martyrs, which I definitely agree with. One of the first thoughts that came to mind was Tupac. I believe that Tupac was an ENFJ, and although he seemed to be like a more like reckless kind of like thug life type of ENFJ, when you look at his life, a lot of people actually call him a prophet. And when you actually watch his interviews that he did, like he's very different from how he portrayed himself, which was crazy. And there was one interview that I had watched that really surprised me, where I was like, wow, this man like really knew exactly what he was doing. He literally sacrificed his image so that he could pretty much be the voice and the face for the people in the ghetto and for the in the hood. He sacrificed, when you watch younger versions of him, like when you watch how he was like when he was younger and everything, he was actually really polite. There's videos of him like, where he talks about like how woman told him that he was too nice and that's why they wouldn't date him and stuff like that. And then they have like, well, then 5 years later, and now he's like this rude, calling women the B word and stuff like that. Not out of anger, but like he kind of like shifted his persona in a way. But the reason why I'm bringing all of that up is because Tupac, he literally like he sacrificed who he was as a person, and his image to portray himself now on the media as someone who is like a lot of the gangsters that he saw around him and the hood people that he saw around him, so that they could see like, hey, so like he's a part of us. But then he also had the intellect, like he read so many books and he really like spoke like a lot of like true wisdom in his lyrics and in interviews. So he did what he had to do to sacrifice his image to be seen as a part of the hood and the gangsters and people. But then he also still utilized that image to have a voice for them, so that way they could accept him, but then he could also speak out for them to protect them, and then also speak to them so they can, we need to stop killing each other. We need to stop doing this. We need to stop doing that. And I feel like that was like, in my opinion, like a very admirable thing of him to do, because he not only became a figurative martyr, he not only became a literal martyr where he did end up dying, he got shot and killed, but he was also a figurative martyr in that he sacrificed, again, like his whole public image. People perceive him to be a lot more hot-headed and a lot more thug and gangster and stuff than he might have really been. And he knew what he was doing. Like I will never forget when I saw this specific interview, I was like, whoa. And he was explaining and breaking down what he had to become in order to then accomplish the mission that he had, that vision that he had for his people. So I think that's like, a really big example of, yet another NF type who, pretty much kind of also even brought in that FETI integration, where it's like, okay, I really want to speak my thoughts, but if I just speak my thoughts, I'm not going to be accepted by the people over here. But then if I just blend in, then I won't be able to speak my thoughts, and then our people are just going to continue to die, and there's just going to be like a whole bunch of chaos still and everything. So he had this, I guess, clever way of killing himself, like martyrdom in a way, figuratively for the public image, so that now he could blend in with the rest of the people. They accept him, and then after they accepted him, he was able to vocalize his thoughts. And I thought that was like pretty cool, where he was like now able to integrate that FETI. However, I still wonder maybe if there could have been a better way that he could have done things. because now it even makes me wonder, like, so is martyrdom like ever a good thing? Like, I believe, for example, like, again, like we often talk about him, but MLK Jr., like, when he died a martyr. Malcolm X, he also died a martyr as well. And I don't think that they necessarily intended to become a martyr. They just saw, like, okay, this is a responsibility that I took up, and I'm going to push it all the way for my people. And I know that this is dangerous, but hopefully, if this happens and this is what it is, even Jesus, I believe that Jesus, he died a martyr. So martyrdom in is potentially not always a bad thing, but I think that you have to, like, do it in a healthy way. And there's a difference between actively just killing yourself, especially when, like, just intentionally, versus, doing something, like taking responsibility for something, and knowing what you're signing up for, and then doing that with a smile on your face, kind of thing. And that's, like, when I look at these types of martyrs that I just, like, listed off, they knew what they signed up for, and they didn't complain. From what I saw, like, they didn't complain, like, oh my gosh, I'm such a giver and I just do this and I just do that and people play me. Like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., like, they had their Jesus, they all had their own people, like, betraying them. They knew what they signed up for, but they still were like, you know what, I'm gonna ride this to the end. And lo and behold, they did do that, and their death of themselves caused surges of people, of their followers, to be able to, like, come up and make things that were powerful even beyond them. And so they saw the vision of what their potential death might be. Whereas, like, in everyday life, you killing yourself to keep everybody around you happy might not be that visionary, like, kind of idea that you're probably thinking of. And on top of that, the last thing that I wrote down is that it could bring for resentment. So coincidentally, even before we had chosen this topic, I mean, so we had already chose this topic to, like, talk about, like, last week, and we just never got to recording it. But just a few days ago, I saw a tweet. I'm always seeing things on Twitter. And I saw someone had tweeted something saying, "Felt this personally." And it's a picture of Bart Simpson and Lisa Simpson. Bart's, like, on the floor, and it looks like he has his knee is hurt, and on his head it's written, "Someone who wouldn't do the same for me." And then Lisa's putting a Band-Aid on his knee, and it says on her head, "Me," which is pretty much the message that, like, oh, I just have such a great heart, and I just do things for people that they would just never return and do back for me. And I don't know how I do it, and that's at least the kind of vibe that I get from it. And I love what Jamila, my wife, she quoted it and said, "Unpopular opinion, but a lot of times I don't think this matters. However, there are boundaries and wisdom and discretion. Doing for others what they wouldn't do for you is a facet of unconditional love. Just understand the dynamic of the relationship and set realistic expectations." And I loved that because, again, if you know what you're signing up for, in my opinion, don't complain about it. Like, do things, like, with a happy face. But if you're, like, if you're signing up to be a martyr, you know what you're doing. So therefore, do it. Try to keep a smile on your face. And if you don't like what you're signing up for, then get out, because it's not your responsibility. You don't have to do this. So I think that's what, like, as I've been talking and trying to distinguish, like, is there ever a good situation to be a martyr? I think that there possibly is, because sometimes we do need the MLKs and the Jesus and, Malcolm X's and other martyrs who've been there throughout time to be the linchpin, I think is the term, to, like, set things going, the catalyst. And it might take their death before so many other people can be awakened from their permanent sleep to now continue the task. But if you're going to be that person, also have the heart and the vision to know what you're putting yourself up for. And even though it's going to be hard, and I'm not saying, like, it's human to complain and to be in pain and everything like that. But if you're like making it out to seem like, oh, woe is me, I think that's something that kind of like bothers me. And I'm a social 9, so apparently, like, we do things like that without complaining. So maybe like that's just my 9ness coming out, like, bro, like, well, I do this all the time, and I try to, like, just keep it to myself. I just, like, I don't resent people for it. So when I see other people kind of like doing the same thing or even less than from my perception, less of what I'm doing, then I'm like, well, then just don't do it. Or like, why are you complaining about this like so much? But if you do want to take that responsibility, nobody should stop you. Just, again, know what you're signing up for and do it with a happy and grateful heart. That's my opinion.
Knowing what you sign up for is such an important concept. I often think that sometimes when people give to other people, they get resentful if they don't get the other person giving back to them. That Twitter post you mentioned earlier, it's basically a person who's starting to resent the fact that they're giving so much, right? And while that's reasonable, I've felt that way too. Everyone has felt that way. I find that it's unfair to the other person to do something and then resent them for it after, because it's not like the other person asked for it sometimes.
Exactly.
I'll relate it back to this. Let's say it's Christmas and you have a friend who bought you a Christmas present of something you don't care about, but it's very expensive. Let's say they bought you this beautiful piano that's 11 grand, okay? But let's say that you hate music and it's an awkward present because although it's really expensive and they had to cash out a lot, ultimately it doesn't mean anything to you. And so sometimes when we give, double check, are we giving because we care about the other person and giving out of love? Or are we giving out of manipulation? Wow. So we're expecting something in return. So sometimes when we give, are we truly considering the other person on the other side? So is your gift reflective of the person that's receiving it? So if you're sacrificing yourself for someone, are they appreciating the sacrifice? Is it within their realm of taste? Is what you're giving them adding to their life? And you have to truly make sure that that's the case, because sometimes in our mind we can think that we're contributing so much to someone while the other person might not be interpreting it that way. It's kind of like an overbearing parent. So let's put ourselves in this situation. There's this young child and we have this parent who wants to get really involved in their young child's life. Like, I want to go to every single thing that you do at school. Like, I want to be at every single event that I can always be at. And then the kid's like, this is suffocating. This amount of love is suffocating. I want to be able to do things with my friends without my mom always joining me and going like, hey, hi. And the mom feels like they're giving up so much of their time to be a good mother, right? While the kid's like, it's okay if you don't do this for me, mom. It doesn't really add that much to my life. It doesn't increase my quality of life to have you at so many events. Maybe if you came to some of them, I would really appreciate it. But there's a certain level where the marginal utility of your actions goes down. So at first, when you were doing it, it added a lot to the other person's life. But if you overdo it, it then stops adding the value that it used to add. So it's an economic concept. So I forgot the name for it. It's like marginal utility of return, or something about there's a bliss point to giving to people. So they might really love it to a certain point, but after a while, if you go past the bliss point, it goes down. So it's like this. There's a perfect amount of salt in a hamburger, right? At that perfect amount, it tastes so great. But if you keep adding salt, you might just ruin the hamburger. You're like, oh, this just tastes like eating a bag of salt. Right? Our love.
Not the best.
You eat it and it just it crushes in your mouth. It's like you're like, this is no longer a hamburger. This is a taste of sodium death. So the way that we give to other people can also feel that way. There's a bliss point to helping someone, and if you overdo it, you can actually detract from their life, and they might actually be better off without that help.
Wow.
And so sometimes we have to keep ourselves in check. Like, when we help people, is it truly making them happier or making their life nicer or easier or smoother? Or are we, like, if they're a minimalist, are we giving them gifts that they really don't need and that they actually want to throw out, but now they're just going to feel guilt for throwing it out because they know that you care?
Exactly.
Are we truly considering the other person when we're trying to give them love? Or are we just loving that idea of them that we have in our head? Or are we actually loving the actual person in front of us?
Right.
And so it's hard to come to terms with that, because people sometimes, we like to assume that we know our loved ones, right? So we know what actions would really help them. But sometimes we can be wrong. Even me, everyone. And so it's good to remain humble and to double check our assumptions, because if our assumptions go unchecked long enough, sometimes we can be helping someone in a long way, but in the wrong way. And so it's not good for either party. It's a lose-lose, right? And so in life, it's best to create as many win-wins as possible.
Right.
As NFs, we kind of believe in that ultimate ideal of that win-win. Everyone can win in this situation. It's kind of idealistic because sometimes it's not realistic. But in our hearts, it feels so real, because as intuitives, we don't always need proof or evidence for what we believe. So we can just have a general idea that this is the better way. We might not know how it's the better way yet. And so we might fight for it a lot. We might go like, I want to find the win-win in every situation. I just really want to make sure everyone gets their needs met as much as possible. That there's no need for everyone to suffer in this. We can all minimize suffering for everyone. And so in an effort to keep our ideals alive, we kill ourselves.
Wow.
It's a martyrdom to our own ideals sometimes. Yeah.
That was beautiful. That was beautifully put. I think that the biggest thing that I got from that was, why are you doing it? And I feel like from all of what you said, I guess in conclusion, I was able to compile maybe a 4-point checklist kind of thing. It's kind of rough, so I don't even want to try to put it in order. But I think that if you have this martyr complex, and you see how it's like killing yourself and everything like that, one of the biggest things that I would ask you to ask yourself is, well, these 4 things. Number 1, is it your responsibility? Make sure that you ask yourself, okay, is whatever that's going on around me or whatever, is it my responsibility? A lot of times, all you have to do is just ask that number 1. And if it's not, then it's like, oh, well, then in that case, I can let this go. Some people, a lot of times it's actually even not your responsibility. But if it isn't your responsibility, that doesn't mean that you don't have to. It doesn't mean that you should not do it or that you can't take on that responsibility. But you just have to, number 2, be aware of the repercussions. Okay, so if you've already asked, is it your responsibility? Now, the second thing you have to ask is, okay, even if it's not my responsibility, I still want to do it. So now step 2 is, do I know what the repercussions of this would be? Do I know how it's potentially going to affect me? Do I know how it might kill me in the process, and all of that? And am I prepared for all of this? Would I be able to do this with a smile on my face and not let it, build into resentment and stuff like that? Because again, nobody asked you to do this. I remember something that came to mind. There was this ISFJ girl that I knew, who me and Jamila, we were staying at her place one time. And she's a really sweet girl. Let me go ahead and say that. But something that made me laugh, this was years ago. She was doing the dishes, and she has roommates and stuff. And she was like, oh yeah, I have to do these dishes because if I don't do them, then nobody else will and stuff like that. And Jamila was like, you don't have to do them. That you don't have to kind of thing. Because the way that she was speaking, it seemed like she was starting to resent them. And it was like, oh, like, woe is me kind of thing. And I guess the response that she was expecting from me and Jamila was like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, you're so sweet and you do this, like, wow. And I'm sure that she should be appreciated for the work that she does. But that goes to, like, my number three. Why are you doing it? So number one is it your responsibility? Number two, are you aware of your repercussions? Number three, why are you doing it? Why are you doing the dishes? Why are you being a martyr? Why are you continuously aiding to this so-called narcissist? Like, why? If you find out the why behind it, then you can now find out the number four, which is the last one. What happens if you don't? And can you live with that? Now, if you find out the why and you're able to identify that, okay, I know why I'm doing it. It's because, like Joyce was just saying, I genuinely do just care for this person. And I love this person, so I'm doing this for like, I'm not doing it for anything in return. It's because I just actually love this person. Even if they can't give back to me, this is just completely altruistic. That is beautiful. And if you're going to kill yourself over that, I guess be my guest, because you know what you signed up for. You're aware of the repercussions. You know why you're doing it. And you're not expecting anything in return. You're just really doing this out of the kindness of your heart. You're not, and somebody who's really doing things like that out of the kindness of their heart, they're not going to be complaining because they know already why they're doing this. They're not going to be like posting stuff to make people like pity for them and stuff like that, because they're operating from a place of like just altruism and like a pure heart kind of thing. But somebody who's like posting these kinds of things and all of that, it's like, okay, no, you're building up resentment. And there's not a problem. That is human. But now, you're actually like, you could have brought yourself out of this situation and you still can. So you're over here complaining about something you don't have to do. You don't have to do those dishes. You can just stick to doing your own. And then when they find out that, oh man, I don't have any dishes to eat from, and you've probably hidden your dishes, well, now they have to learn how to do their dishes. And a lot of times that's what you have to do. That's what I would have done. Like, eventually you have to teach these people, like, okay, this is why. But again, if you just genuinely love washing dishes, go ahead and do that. But then don't complain about it afterwards, and try to like get other people, like, I guess, feel pity for you in a sense. And so apply that to your real life. And yeah, that's what I have to say about that. Watch out for that bliss period, eventually, yeah, you're washing the dishes, or whatever. But now you're just doing so much for the person that eventually it's like, okay, you know what? Like, I can do this by myself. And it's like, no, I insist. And you're kind of like forcing yourself on them. You're doing the buying the grand piano thing. And it's like, I appreciate that you dropped all this money, but like, now it's like, that's why a lot of people struggle with accepting gifts, because they're like, okay, wait, what is attached to this? Like, you're giving me this. Oh crap. Now you're expecting me to give something back to you, or like, oh, you're showering me with these compliments and stuff. Oh, great. Now you're expecting me to give you compliments back. And for me, I noticed this, and that's why, again, like, I try to ask myself these questions. Okay, I'm saying this long happy birthday text message to someone. Why am I doing it? Well, because, I appreciate them and I genuinely love them and yada, yada, yada. Okay, do you understand the repercussions? Like, maybe they might not text back as long-winded as you just were and all of this. Yeah, that's fine, because I did it in respect to them, like in appreciation for them, not so they can like text back as much or whatever. And, or like, now I'm going to be waiting on my birthday for them to do the same thing. No, I did this from my own heart. So these are things that we should all like consider and look into ourselves as we make these decisions. And yeah, do you have anything to add to that?
Those are really good NI condensed takeaways from this whole thing. Those 4 points is a really good narrowed down summation of the things that you should be looking for when you're giving. The thoughts that will help you make better decisions with giving. The 80-20 of giving. Like, what questions will give you the most bang for your buck before you give? That was a really good summation.
Thanks.
Denzel,
Couldn't have done it without your thoughts.
yeah, this is what happens when two idealists get together. They just are able to refine their ideals together. Antonia Dodge had a tweet recently, and it was about seeing things in terms of giving a gift to your future self. And that everything you do, every single moment of every single thing ever, is you giving a gift to your future self. And if you see the act of giving the same way, it's like, if I give to this person, will it ultimately feel light and easy with my future self? Or will it make my future self feel resentful? So it's kind of calculating that into it too. When you give, does it come from a pure place? So will it not upset your future self if they don't give back the same amount? Or do you feel like you're expecting reciprocity and that it's going to actually bring up really negative thoughts and feelings from your future self? That'll give you a calibration of why you're doing what you're doing and if you should do what you do. Because I believe that every action you do you should also consider how your future self will react to it. It never made sense to me. Sometimes, like, it's perplexing to me in human nature when people will do things but then hate the other person for it after. And it's like, man, if you calculate the fact that you could actually hate that person if you actually did that for them, maybe it's better that you didn't even do it in the first place, because now that person has to deal with your resentment, which is probably way more tedious than the value your initial action gave to the other person. So it's kind of calibrating the value. Is this going to add more value to my future self, or is this going to leave me at a net neutral? So it's kind of seeing things as a net positive, a net neutral, or a net negative to your future self, and kind of making sure that everything is in line with your future vision for yourself, and that you're not going against or betraying your future self, because you will always be resentful if you have to betray your future self for a long enough period. So to prevent that resentment in the first place, it's to see, does this really fit in with, is this in line with who I want to be and who I want to become? Because when you're constantly stacking actions where you're acting in a way where it's not who you want to become, it's not who you want to be, you'll start to experience the most foundational form of resentment if you do things that are against who you want to become. And so it is so important to factor that in. Like, if you are feeling resentment right now, it's very likely that whatever actions you're doing right now in your life, you feel like it's taking you away from who you want to become. And so you're feeling a deep sense of resentment towards your boundaries being crossed because it's preventing you from being the person you want to be.
Right.
Yeah. And yeah, it's not fair to the other person that they're putting you in that state. And it's not fair to you that you're in a state where you're a compromised version of yourself. And so, the FE in me and the NI, having that future calibration or consideration, wants that win-win to be long-term. It wants it to be sustainable. It wants every interaction to be a two-way interaction, right? And so in order to do that, we have to be mindful of when we're generating resentment and to figure out ways to prevent that so that we don't become monsters. Because it's so easy. Like, there's a quote that you have, Denzel, that you talk about: every sinner has a part of his life where they're kind, or every saint has a past.
Every saint has a past, and every sinner has a future. It's actually one of J. Cole's verses. Every saint has a past, every sinner has a future. Every winner gotta lose, and every loser gotta win, and every winner gotta lose someday. Yeah,
you're gonna jazz out to the And so what that demonstrates is that situations can bring sides of us out too. I kind of see everyone as an epigenetic, and so we have a core DNA, right? So we are, but what's repressed and what's expressed sometimes depends on the situation too. So certain situations can bring out the worst in us. And I call that side of us the monster. And so in order for us to have exchanges where we're being as loving as possible, we have to figure out the areas in which it brings out these sides of us we're not proud of, the monsters, and to try to engineer it in a way where we have that as little as possible. And so it's kind of like an alcoholic. They know certain alcohols that trigger them, right? So when they go to AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, they're like, I'm going to be around that specific alcohol less because I know when I'm around it, I really want to drink it. And so when you engineer an environment where you know what you're resentful of and you try to create situations where that's less of the case, you will show less of your monster to the external world. And that will also create happier situations for you. And then that will make you want to be more giving naturally from a lighthearted, loving, whole, pure-hearted place.
Right.
And so when we're able to bring out the best in ourselves, we'll naturally feel more giving as a response to that. So it's almost like, does the act of giving feel light and easy, or does it feel heavy? And that's also a very subconscious cue that can tell you if you're giving for the right reasons. When we give, are we giving from a place of love, or are we giving from a place of insecurity? And it's important because that means everything. It defines the whole nature of what you're giving. I mean, it defines the whole nature of why you give, which is more important than the act of giving itself.
Oh, yeah, that was so beautifully stated, per usual, Joyce. So yeah, thank y'all for watching. Be sure to leave questions, comments, concerns, even ideas for some of the next Knife Show videos. If you want any coaching from the two of us, check out the description box, email us. And I guess, yeah, thanks for tuning into the Knife Show today. And until next time,
Stay sharp.